Welcome back, everyone, to the Duo Dialogues. You know, in our last deep dive, we were looking at greetings and introductions.
Right.
And it kind of naturally leads to the question of, okay, so what happens after you say hi?
Yeah.
What happens after you've greeted someone, maybe exchanged names?
Yeah, actually.
How do you turn that into a real conversation?
Absolutely.
A conversation that goes somewhere.
Yeah. And that's what we are going to focus on today. What keeps a conversation going? One of the resources that we looked at described conversation like a game of ping pong.
Oh.
And I really like that analogy.
Yeah.
Someone serves the ball by asking a question. You return the serve by answering. And then to keep the rally going, you have to serve it back. And that's where asking questions becomes so important.
I think we can all relate to that feeling of,
Yeah.
okay, I've answered the question, but now what?
Yeah.
How do I keep this going?
Right. That's so common. And that's exactly what we want to help you with today. So in this deep dive, our mission is to give you some useful question patterns and practical exercises from the materials you shared to overcome that hurdle of, what to say next to keep the conversation going.
So let's start with a very basic question.
Yeah.
Why is asking questions so important in a conversation?
Well, on a fundamental level, conversation is an exchange.
Right.
It's a back and forth.
Yeah.
And when you ask a question, you're signaling to the other person that you are present, that you're engaged, and that you're genuinely interested in what they have to say.
Like if someone says, how are you? And you just say, fine.
Right.
And then there's silence.
Exactly.
That's kind of a dead end for the conversation.
Yeah, and it might even send the wrong message. Even if you don't intend to, it can make the other person feel like you're not really interested in talking.
But if you say, I'm fine, thanks, how are you?
Right.
Then you're inviting them to share.
Exactly. Yeah.
Keeping that ping pong game going.
And you're showing them that you care about how they're doing.
It's also a way of showing respect for the other person.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's like you're saying, I value your opinion. I want to hear what you have to say.
It's about reciprocity. You give a little, and then they give a little, and the conversation builds from there.
I think a really important takeaway here is to always try to ask something back.
Yes.
It doesn't have to be anything complicated. Even just, and you,
Yeah.
or what about you,
Exactly.
can make a big difference.
It shows that you're listening and that you want to keep the conversation going.
So now that we know why asking questions is so important, let's talk about what kinds of questions you can actually ask.
Okay.
In everyday English conversation,
Sure.
the materials you shared have some really good examples, starting with some basic small talk questions.
Right, those initial questions that you can use to break the ice and get a conversation started.
Like, how are you?
Yeah.
What do you do?
Mm-hmm.
Where are you from?
Exactly. Those are all good ones.
And how would you recommend answering them?
Well, let's take how are you, for example. A good answer is, I'm great, thanks. How about you? It's positive, it's polite, and it invites the other person to respond.
And what about, what do you do?
For that, you could say, I'm a student. How about you? Or, I work in marketing. What about you?
Simple and to the point.
Yeah, and then you can build from there, depending on their response.
And where are you from?
You could say, I'm from Argentina, and you? Or, I'm originally from China, but I live in the U.S. now. What about you?
So these are all pretty straightforward questions and answers,
Right.
but they can be really effective for starting a conversation.
And for finding some common ground,
Exactly.
which is really important in those early stages.
So once you've gotten past the initial small talk, how do you move the conversation deeper?
That's where you can start asking questions that are a little more personal, questions that help you get to know the other person better.
The materials you shared have some good examples for that, too.
Yeah.
Like, what do you like to do in your free time?
Yeah, that's a good one.
Or do you have any hobbies?
Mm-hmm.
Or what kind of music do you like?
Exactly.
These are all questions that can give you some insight into the other person's interests and personality.
And they can also help you to find things that you have in common.
Right? Like if you both enjoy hiking or playing the guitar.
Or if you both hate the same band.
Exactly. So how would you answer those kinds of questions?
Well, let's say someone asks you, what do you like to do in your free time?
Okay.
You could say something like, I enjoy hiking and playing the guitar. How about you? Or, I'm really into photography and cooking. What about you?
And for what kind of music do you like?
You could say, I'm a big fan of jazz. What about you?
Mm-hmm.
Or, I like a little bit of everything, but I'm really into indie rock these days. How about you?
And again, it's always important to ask something back.
Yes, that's key.
It keeps the conversation going.
Yeah.
And it shows that you're interested in the other person.
Now, in addition to those kinds of questions, the resources also talked about some fun and creative questions.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
Like, if you could visit any country, where would you go?
Oh, I like that one.
Or what's your favorite movie?
Those are good for getting people thinking
Right.
and for learning something interesting about them.
And they can also be a good way to inject some of your own personality into the conversation.
So if you could visit any country, where would you go?
You could say, I'd love to visit Japan. How about you?
And
Or, I've always wanted to go to Iceland. What about you?
for what's your favorite movie?
You could say, I really enjoy the movie Inception. How about you? Or, my favorite movie of all time is probably The Shawshank Redemption. What about you?
It's funny how even a simple question like that
Yeah.
can lead to such a long conversation.
Right. You could end up talking about movies for hours.
So we've talked about a lot of different types of questions, but how do they all fit together in an actual conversation?
Well, the resources you shared had some role-play scenarios that showed exactly that.
Oh, perfect.
Let's take a look at one.
Okay.
So in this scenario, we have two people meeting for the first time at a party.
Right.
Their names are Alex and Jamie. Alex starts by saying, hi, how's it going? And Jamie says, hey, I'm doing well. Thanks. How about you?
So Jamie's already asking a question back.
Exactly. And then Alex says, I'm good too. By the way, where are you from? And Jamie says, I'm originally from South Korea. And you? And then Alex says, I'm from Canada. So what do you like to do in your free time? And Jamie says, I enjoy hiking and playing the guitar. What about you?
So it's just a natural back and forth.
Exactly.
They're both asking and answering questions, and the conversation is flowing smoothly.
And it's moving from those initial greetings to more personal topics.
Yeah, the resources also have some really helpful conversation tips,
Oh, yes, they do.
especially for beginners who might be feeling a little nervous about speaking English.
Right, because even if you know the questions to ask, you still might feel a little hesitant to actually use them.
So what are some of the tips?
Well, the first tip is to give slightly longer answers.
Oh.
So instead of just saying yes or no, try to add a little bit more information. For example, if someone asks you, did you have a good weekend? Instead of just saying yes, you could say, yes, it was nice. I managed to finish reading a book I was really enjoying. That gives the other person more to work with.
And it makes the conversation more interesting.
Exactly.
The second tip is one that we've already talked about, but it's worth repeating.
What is it?
Always use and you.
Yeah.
Or what about you?
Yes. It's such a simple thing, but it makes such a big difference.
It shows that you're listening and that you care about the other person, and it helps to keep the conversation going,
The third tip is for if you don't understand a question.
which can happen to anyone.
Especially when you're learning a new language, don't be afraid to ask the person to repeat themselves. You can say, could you please repeat that? Or, sorry, I didn't quite catch that.
Most people are happy to repeat themselves.
Yeah, they won't mind at all.
And the last tip is to smile.
Oh, yes, smiling is so important. It makes you seem more friendly and approachable.
And it can really help to put the other person at ease.
Exactly, because communication is about so much more than just the words we say. It's also about our body language and our tone of voice.
So let's do a quick recap of what we talked about today.
Okay.
We started by talking about why asking questions is so important for keeping conversations going.
Right.
And we looked at some common questions that you can use in everyday English conversation, starting with small talk questions like, how are you? And what do you do?
And then we moved on to more personal questions like, what do you like to do in your free time? And do you have any hobbies? And we even talked about some fun and creative questions like, if you could visit any country, where would you go?
We also looked at some role-play scenarios
Why?
to see how these questions and answers work in actual conversations. And finally, we went over some helpful conversation tips for beginners.
Like giving longer answers using and you or what about you? Not being afraid to ask for repetition and smiling.
So now we want to give you a little homework.
Yes.
We want you to go out there and start a conversation with at least one person in English.
It could be anyone, a friend, a coworker, even a stranger at the coffee shop.
Just try to use some of the questions and tips that we talked about today.
And see what happens.
Don't be afraid to make mistakes. That's how you learn.
And remember, the more you practice, the more confident you'll become.
That's all for this deep dive into the art of asking and answering questions in English. We hope you found it helpful.
We had fun.
In our next deep dive, we'll be talking about how to describe things and people effectively in English.
So be sure to tune in for that.
See you next time on the Duo Dialogues.